We'll get started in just a couple seconds. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. It is November 11th, the second Wednesday of the month, and that means it's time for our second Wednesday safety session. So thank you very much for being with us here today. My name is Carlos Carrillo. I'm the Executive Director of the South Florida chapter of the Associated General Contractors of America. So we're broadcasting live from the SafeRite Solutions studios. It's not really a studio, it's a training center, but the folks at SafeRite have been very gracious to us during the pandemic and during the turn that we've had to make to keep serving you all, and have allowed us to film right here from their facility. So thank you very much to Andres and the team from SafeRite. I also want to recognize another group of folks that have allowed us to make this possible, our technical advisors, the folks over at Kelly Cronenberg. Thank you to Tim and Cedric, and to Kelly Cronenberg, everybody over there, for helping us out and letting us put this on. South Florida AGC has been around since 1922. And since that time, safety on the construction site has been very important to us. And that's why we are proud to be able to provide you with these safety sessions and give you some fantastic information each month to make your work site safer. That being said, we can't do this without the help of our sponsors like Kelly Cronenberg and SafeRite, or our title sponsors, Milwaukee, who we are lucky enough to have here today. So I'd like to turn things over to Uriel Soto. Uriel, come on up. We're going to do safe social distancing, so it'll be a second before he's on camera.
All right, good morning, South Florida AGC members. Thanks again for joining us for the Safety Committee of November. We're excited to keep our industry and our trade going productive and safe on the work site. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the innovations that Milwaukee has introduced to the market to help keep that job site safe, keep it productive, and then bring new technology into the market.
Give me 1 second, Uriel.
All right. And give us 1 second. We're going to be pulling up the presentation shortly. One second.
Ready to go?
Go back. All right, perfect. So go to the second slide. All right, so
hold on, we are actually frozen.
can everybody still hear us out there?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, perfect. So MX Fuel. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the product. MX Fuel is actually going to be revolutionizing the light heavy equipment. So the equipment that you'll normally see out there, that's gas, running off generators or running off hydraulics. So how is this going to help your job site be a little bit safer? Obviously, with gas, you have a lot of emissions. So when you're working indoors, you're going to be able to eliminate those carbon monoxides and the hazards of those emissions and make sure that your work, your team, your subcontractors, and everybody on that site's a little bit safer when working indoors. Another thing with that, obviously, a lot less maintenance when it comes to those gas-powered products, right? Now, what about these electric-powered products that you're looking at, core drills, breakers, things of that nature that are constantly tripping breakers? So you're going to be able to eliminate that. Obviously, also eliminate the cord when you're working off a generator, and also those emissions that that generator is going to be putting out, right? So you're eliminating multiple safety hazards on the job site by introducing this new MX fuel line. So we have a couple different products as of now. We're going to be releasing a 14-inch cutoff saw. That saw is going to allow you, again, to cut concrete, heavy metals, indoor, outdoor, without any emissions. It's going to be the fastest cut from the start to the end. We also have a breaker. Our jackhammer breaker is going to allow you to continue to deliver that same power on a battery-powered, completely cordless platform. So you're going to have a lot less kickback from that breaker, therefore causing a lot less user fatigue and then long-term injury down the line. And then we're also going to have our core drill, which we're going to be releasing. So it's also a completely cordless solution. So you're going to be able to eliminate the cord, the generator, the gas, and then we're also going to add additional features, our clutch, our auto stop. So that's going to prevent that core drill from binding up and in a situation, you know, throwing your guy off a ladder or even injuring them in that fashion. So a couple of different safety features that we have on there. We're also going to be releasing in February our power supply, which is going to allow you to run 15 amp corded tools on the job site, or even have different charging stations across the job site without having zero emissions. So completely corded solution. And then we're also going to have a light tower. So it's going to be putting out about 27,000 lumens. It's going to be comparable to your diesel pull behinds. So another thing you're going to be able to eliminate on the job site is going to be that diesel emission that you're going to be putting out while still getting 27,000 lumens on that job site to light up that site, make sure that everybody can see where they're going and eliminate trip hazards. So those are some of the products that we're working on right now. We're also working on a lot of prototypes with our partners. So if there's anything that you need to know or you want to see out there from Milwaukee, we're open to ideas, and then also always looking to collaborate when it comes to our market research with our AGC partners. So thank you guys very much. I'm going to pass it back over to Carlos.
Hey guys, as happens on occasion with Zoom and other webinar programs, we're having some technical difficulties. So I ask you guys to please bear with us for just one moment. What I'd actually like to do is go ahead and kick things over to our presenters today. So Mr. Murphy, if you'd like to get your PowerPoint on and share that screen, we would love it. So let's do this. Our safety committee does not mess around when it comes to finding great presenters for our safety sessions. This month's topic, Approaching EMR Strategically, is being presented by two industry professionals with almost 40 years of industry experience. First up, Chris Murphy is Vice President of Enterprise Loss Control at Holmes Murphy Associates. In his role, he leads Holmes Murphy's team of loss control consultants, got to say that one 3 times fast, and provides safety and risk management services to large clients across a variety of industries. He says construction companies are his favorite, though. All right, just making sure I'm covering you, Chris. Chris, I believe, is also dealing with 40-degree weather in Iowa right now. So let's keep Chris in our thoughts. Brandon Bean. Brandon Bean oversees coastal construction's risk management and insurance programs to assure broad and cost-effective coverage across all operations and on a project-by-project basis. I mean, he only does it at what I believe is the largest construction firm by volume in all of South Florida, right? In addition to his role at Coastal, Brandon is a partner with NHG Specialty, who is a retail insurance brokerage exclusively serving the construction industry and closest to my heart. Brandon Bean serves as first vice president to the South Florida AGC and will start his term as president on our centennial year in 2022. Gentlemen, fingers crossed for no more technical difficulties. Let's get the ball rolling. Mr. Murphy, the show is yours.
Thank you. Is there someone that needs to mute in the background, Carlos?
We're not a tri-club. Some of these.
I hear it too. There's somebody muttering.
We're more of a business networking. Like we do now, usually in person.
Okay, I can start, and hopefully that person recognizes they're not muted. Sorry. Hey, Carlos, thanks for the warm welcome. Yes, especially you gave me 13 degrees of credit that I haven't earned yet because we're only at 27. All the way up to the 40s today, but yeah, definitely not South Florida weather up here in the Midwest. I appreciate the invite to speak today and to share the stage with Brandon here. And I'm going to handle the first part of this, and then Brandon will take us into, now that we know about how the math and the mod works, what are some of the things that you can do as a business owner or a contractor to influence the mod in the right direction. So we'll kick things off here. I use the term mod a lot. It's the shortest way for me to say it. Officially, this program is titled Influencing Your Experience Modification Rate. So we'll talk about the EMR, but know that in the industry, there are a lot of different names this goes under. Some may call it the mod, experience mod. EMR seems to be pretty common in the construction industry, maybe not so much in general industry that I work with as well. EMF, experience rating, mod rating, this is tomato, tomato. Whatever you call it is fine. We're talking about the same thing. And you'll see me change names throughout the talk just to kind of hopefully hit one that everybody will like eventually. I really like this slide because this is how it works. If you look at the name experience modification rate, and we kind of take that word by word, it's essentially a rate modifier that looks backwards at your actual claims experience, compares that to what would be expected based on the type of work that you do and the payrolls that you generate, and then compares you to the rest of your peer group. And everybody, I think, on this call recognizes that when that number is below 1, that's a good thing. We call that a credit modifier. We'll talk a little bit later about how low that can go. We're not going to get to a situation where your mod is 0. I think everybody would love if that were the case, but the math just will not work out that way. Credit modifiers are great. If you're right on that 1.00, you are aligned with what the industry would expect your claim cost to be related to your payrolls and expected losses. We call that a unity modifier. And then if you're above 1.00, we know that there's some issues associated with that. Brandon will hit on those a little bit later. And we call that a debit modifier. So the formula is actually really easy. It's just a comparison of your actual losses to what would be expected that you would generate in losses, looking at your payrolls and your rates and your class codes and those types of things. But the math gets a little bit tricky, and that's what I'll be handling in the first half of this presentation. So for example, if you had $500,000 in actual losses and $400,000 in expected losses, you would have an experience modifier or EMR of 1.25. However, that $500,000 in actual losses is not what you might pull off of an insurance company's loss run. We're going to see how the math is a little bit tricky, and that's what trips some people up. As I mentioned before, the actual and expected losses, we'll see this on one of my last slides. There's a ballast factor that goes on the top and the bottom, so the numerator and denominator of the equation, that prevents your mod from going all the way to 0. We'll show that a little bit later on. So what is your work comp premium based on? The type of work that you perform, so essentially the class of your work. We'll take a look at a couple of examples of how a manual rate is generated on an upcoming slide. We'll see that, for example, sewer contractors, simply due to the risk that's involved in that job, pay a lot more than someone like me that sits in an office all day long. It also takes into account your labor hours, which generates your payroll. And then there's this interesting mix of frequency and severity that we'll talk about a little bit later. And you'll see as we talk about this topic called split point, how those work together to generate what goes into the actual losses in the mod formula. So here's how premium is generated in a nutshell. If you are purchasing work comp insurance from an insurance company, it's a pretty simple math that goes on. We take a look at how much payroll you have in that class code. So for example, on the screen here, we're showing a sewer construction company that has about $3.2 million in payroll in that class. And then they have office personnel, the 8810 payroll that's generating about $780,000 in premium. And you can see that the rates vary widely, as you might expect, based on the historic losses of that class code, or in other words, just simply that sewer construction is a lot more likely to develop losses than those of us that sit in an office. And so when you multiply that 3.2 million times 6.78, divide that by 100, you come up with about $220,000 in work comp premium for the sewer construction end of the business, and another 1,000 or so with the clerical office employees. And I pulled those class code ratings right off that website that's captioned below. And those were the 2020 rates for each of those class codes. Where the mod comes in is that now let's say that we've got 3 sewer contractors, and by a stroke of luck, all of them generate exactly the same amount of premium. Well, what we do then is we take the subject premium base rate, essentially multiply it by the experience mod, assuming no debits or credits are placed on the work comp policy by your underwriter, and you generate a total work comp premium that looks a heck of a lot different between contractor number 1 and contractor number 3. And what is super important to remember is that, let's say that you've got a 10% profit margin. Maybe your margins are a little bit higher, maybe they're a little bit lower, but it's easy to use 10% as an example because we just add a 0. If there's a difference in $155,000 between contractor number 1 and contractor number 3, at a 10% profit margin, you need to drive about $1.5 million of additional sales just to pay the difference in your work comp expenses. Something important here is that I'm not as familiar with the South Florida real estate market as I am up in Iowa. So let's talk about my neck of the woods. If I go out house hunting this weekend and I look at a $311,000 house, and I look at a $155,000 house, I should expect some differences, maybe in age, in square footage, in land. There's something different between those two numbers. In work comp, there is no difference. The insuring agreement looks exactly the same, whether you're paying $311,000 or you're paying $155,000. The insurer is going to pay for the losses that are due under the state law. So it's behoove you to keep that experience mod, for various reasons that Brandon will get into a little bit later, as low as it could possibly be. The timing on this, I've worked for a couple of insurance companies and both of them were the same. Insurer sends experience data to NCCI and the state rating bureaus about 6 months after policy expiration every year. But keep in mind, it's designed to be a snapshot in time. Your reserves move every single day. So I'm certain that we've got about 30 participants on this call today. One of you is going to have a call with a claims representative at some point today. You're going to provide additional information on an open claim that's going to change the amount of that reserve. But that's not going to be sent to NCCI today so that your experience mod is updated in real time.
Hey,
it doesn't
Chris,
work that way. Yes, sir.
Just a point of clarification, because the background of the people on this call is going to be very varied. So some of them may not be that familiar with concepts like reserves. You want to spend a little bit of time talking about what a reserve is and what that process looks like, because it's important here.
Yeah, good point. That was one of the questions that came out, and I was going to hit on that a bit later. Reserves. So essentially, when a claim comes into an insurance company, the claim representative is going to use a combination of their own experience, a computer expert program, a roundtable discussion with other claims adjusters, and a variety of other tools to essentially estimate, based on the facts of the case, what's this thing going to cost to close? And not all the information is available at that point. So it's essentially the insurer's best guess as to what the total value of that claim is going to be at closure. At that point, the entire amount of the claim is called a reserve. So the reserve, let's say, is $50,000 set up. That's how much we think is going to be paid. The total incurred loss at that point would still be $50,000. As money is paid on that claim, either in medical or lost time benefits, the reserve will go down. In, let's say, 25,000 has been paid, 25,000 might be in reserve. The total incurred is still $50,000. So Brandon, essentially a reserve is just how much we think we still have to pay on a claim, but it hasn't been paid quite yet.
And
Appreciate
guys,
the
we'll
question.
talk about this a little bit later, but it's important to realize a reserve, and Chris is going to go through the math. A reserve, while it's an estimate and you're not paying dollars and the insurance company's not paying dollars, it's still a very important number to keep your eyes on and manage through this process.
Very accurate. And I know that you go through that a little bit later.
I'm very sorry.
Hey, Carlos, we have some background. If you could maybe
No,
mute it.
you adapted.
Carlos, please mute your line.
All right. Thanks for that, Brandon. Yeah, Brandon will talk about reserves a little later. One of the questions for those of you that filled out the pre-survey was that maybe there's not an understanding of the importance that reserves play in experience mods. They most certainly count just as a dollar paid. It's what the insurer intends to pay to get that case closed. So I think that it's very important to understand this idea of the 3-year rolling average on this as well. So let's take an example where the work comp policy just renewed, October 1st of 2020. We're now just past a month into the policy period. Let's look at the 3 years that are considered in that experience rating formula. It is not the current year or the most recently completed year. So if you have the insurance year that you're in right now, assuming that you were a 10-1 renewal, is looking at claims from the period of October 1st of 2016 through October 1st of 2019. And because of this idea of 3-year rolling average, let's just advance. And at your next policy renewal, October 1st of 2021, we're going to drop off that oldest year and pick up the newest year. And so we just keep doing that, dropping off the oldest, picking up the newest as we advance the policy period every single year. One of the most erroneous assumptions that people make, we're gonna go over this right now. Apologize for the background noise. Carlos, I hope you're hearing us here. I know you were having a bit of technical difficulty earlier. Carlos was gonna pull up a Zoom poll for me here, but we'll see if he's able to check in. So one of the things that a lot of people assume is that that 3-year rolling average is truly just a comparison of the drop-off year versus the incoming year. So Carlos, if you can hear me in the background, we'll kind of get ready to queue up the Zoom poll here. We've got a scenario we're going to go through. You're in the renewal process with your insurance broker for your upcoming January 1 of 21 renewal. And you're surprised that your experience mod is moving from a 0.88. So you were at a credit mod situation, you're going up to a 1.01. So now you're in that debit mod situation. And you're surprised by that because you're dropping off a year with $200,000 in incurred losses. Incurred losses, again, being that combination of what's been paid plus what's still in reserve that we think we're going to pay. And you're picking up a year with $180,000 in incurred losses. And you'd always thought that due to that 3-year rolling average, your mod was supposed to drop in those type of situations. So let's, Carlos, if you're here and you can hear me, if we can queue up that Zoom poll, and we're going to let the audience vote if they think that something like this is possible.
Excuse me.
Friends, I think Carlos is having a little bit of trouble down in South Florida. We had a Zoom poll up here.
So I'm not sure that we may not see it because we're presenters. Oh, we're having a problem.
Okay, very well. Okay, they're having technical difficulties back there. No trouble. How about if you want to take a few seconds and if you have your chat popped up, what do you think? Is it possible? A quick yes or no in the chat if you want to do it to me. Yeah, Brian Trusky noted that. I do not see the poll. Carlos is having some trouble with his Zoom this morning. If you want to vote using the chat feature, that's fine. I'll give people a couple seconds to pop that in if they want to interact with the poll. I'm sorry, not with the poll, but just a direct chat to panelists or everyone. If you want to vote, please do. Otherwise, I'll simply go into the answers. Okay, Michael thinks it's possible. All right. Thanks, Michael.
Chris, it feels like a trick question, man.
Sort of. We're going to go through 4 reasons. Okay, Danny, yeah, I like this. Depends on the revenues, depends on the incurred losses for the last 3 years. We've got a no question mark. So that's what I call like an unsure no. Brian says yes. All right, we're getting a feel that a lot of people, had the poll been available, would have gone that this is possible. It is certainly possible. Now let's look at this graphically. So we've seen what years we're comparing. Here we have a $200,000 year back in 14. We're dropping that off and we're picking up the $180,000 year. So this is our situation. How can it be possible that if we're taking 200,000 away and adding 180, that our mod's going to go up from 0.88 to 1.01? 4 typical reasons why that happens. 1, you have 10% fewer losses. See, we're going from 200 to 180. We reduced our losses by 10% or $20,000. But again, remember, this is a comparison between your actual losses and your expected losses, which are driven by payroll. So if your payroll goes down by 10%, but your losses go down by 10%, but that payroll goes down 30%, the math is going to work out that the mod will actually go up. Additionally, claims for the middle 2 years may have developed. Keep in mind that until those claims are closed, they could develop up or down. A lot of times in work comp, they're going to develop up. So what the claims adjuster and you thought was a situation where a person was not going to be surgical, now all of a sudden a surgery is required and the loss goes from $20,000 to $40,000. That's going to be captured in your mod in the upcoming year. Next one, consider expected losses. The expected losses are based on your industry experience. Now, this is probably the least likely reason for it to occur, but as automation becomes more common, if all of your peer group in that class code is using automation and you're still doing things the manual way, the losses are going to be expected to go down. And if you're not moving down with the rest of the industry, your mod is going to reflect that. And then finally, there's a different mix of the frequency and the severity of losses. What we know is the split point. I'll demonstrate this here in a second, but not all $200,000 are created equal. And we're going to see how that works as I finish out my slides here in just a second. So how this idea of a split point works, I believe the split point down in Florida, about $17,000 per claim. So in this case, we're just going to take a really simple example. We have someone that was throwing a bag of trash into a dumpster. As a result, there was a shoulder injury incurred and the cost of that claim is $10,000. Because all $10,000 is below what we call the split point, the primary loss is going to be $10,000 and there is no excess loss. So everything below the split point is weighted in that actual losses portion of the mod at 100% of the value. Now let's say that injury to the shoulder for this gentleman was not a $10,000 loss, but instead it was a $25,000 loss. We're using 15,000 as the split point in this case, just because it's simpler to think about. The first 15,000 is going to be weighted at the full 100%, but the remaining 10,000 is weighted only at whatever the W value or the weighting factor is on your experience rating worksheet. In this case, this example, it was 31%. So the primary loss was that full 15,000. The remainder is 3,100. So we can see that not all claims are created equal. And we're going to take a look at how this develops out. The Experience Mod system, there's a bunch of smart actuaries that live down there in Boca Raton at the NCCI headquarters. And the math tells them that there's a better predictability of future losses using that combination of frequency and severity than just severity alone. In layman's terms, the more frequency you have, the more likely you are to develop high severity. So an insurance company would rather take on a risk that had 1 claim per year than one that had 10 claims per year, even if the severity was equal, because any one of those 10 would be more likely to develop into a more severe loss. So we'll just take a look at how this works out. Case 1, $100,000, a $40,000, and a $10,000 loss. All of them have indemnity or some type of lost time. Case 2, there's 15 claims, all at $10,000 each, and all have lost time. And then case 3 is kind of a unique one just to illustrate how this idea of experience rating works, or the experience rating reduction for med-only claims. We have 15 med-only claims, each at $10,000, which had they had lost time, they would have been significantly more expensive. But for the case of this illustration, we're just going to say that all of those were medical only. The idea of this experience rating adjustment program, it's a really big benefit to you in Florida and these other experience rating adjustment participating states. It reduces the amount that goes into your experience rating formula by 70% if you can keep claims in a medical only status. So if you had $1,000 medical only claim, no lost time, $300 goes into that calculation of your actual losses. But as soon as $1 of indemnity is paid, the full $1,000 goes in. So it's very important, as Brandon will talk about a little bit later, to try to keep those claims in med only status. So the losses are the same, but let's look at, in each of those cases, what final experience rating would have been generated. In case 1, where we had the 3 claims, a 0.78, not bad at all. Case 2, 15 at $10,000 each, a 0.96. So for those of you that are familiar with the term loss ratio from an insurer standpoint, in each of these cases, the loss ratio would have been exactly the same. Let's say you were paying $300,000 in work comp, you had $150,000 in losses, over $300,000 in paid, a 50% loss ratio. But you can see the mods that are generated based on just this mix of frequency and severity are very different. Again, all of these would be considered a credit mod, but I'm most certain that you'd rather keep that money in your own pocket at a 0.78 as compared to a 0.96. And then I'll close my portion of this by answering the question that most people like to ask when we're talking about experience ratings, is the limbo question: how low can it go? It's not 0. We talked a little bit earlier in the middle of my screen, this idea of a stabilizing value that's the same on the top and bottom of the formula. It prevents the mod from going to 0. But if you want your mod to go as low as possible, or if you want to see how low you could have been today had you had no losses, simply take a look at your experience rating worksheet, get that from your broker, insurance carrier, underwriter, and pop where it shows your primary actual losses and your excess losses, pop zeros into that. And if you were to do that, you would simply add across, and you would have 238,000 over 403, generating a experience rating of 0.59. So recognize that even if you had no losses in that rating period of the rolling 3 years, your mod's not going to be driven to 0. It's going to have a minimum mod, as you're still going to have risk that the insurer is going to want to price for. Okay.
So, Chris, I like that slide. Can we go back to that slide real quick?
Yes, sir.
Guys, just to give you a little bit of backstory and history, earlier in my career, I worked for a large national general contractor, and I was in a meeting of all the different heads of loss prevention from around the country, and the lead person for safety across the country put up some goals around driving the experience mod down. And, you know, I went back to the office and kind of dug into it. And I didn't really know much about experience mods at that point in my career, but the goals were not achievable. The math didn't work out. You know, if you had 0 in losses for the 3-year period, you still wouldn't get to what the safety person presented as the goals for the organization. So I tell you because it's funny, but I also tell you because I think as safety professionals and as risk professionals, this number here is really, really important and powerful. It's really the number against which you should measure yourself and measure your company and present yourself, present your data to your company, and provide context to what you're doing. Because, you know, as Chris has showed you with this math, your 0.8 may be equal to or better than somebody's 0.7. So, and you're not going to know that without going through this sort of analysis and comparing it. You know, this is your denominator, right? You use this number to figure out how you're performing against what all the data in the country for your space tells you should be performing. It's a real quick and dirty number, but it's a real figure that has a lot of data and math behind it, and it'll help you in goal setting, it'll help you in communication, it'll help you in resource allocation within your organization. And you should really be getting this data year in and year out from your insurance professionals, from your risk manager, from your broker, and look at it, understand it, and measure yourself against it.
It's a very good point, Brandon. Years ago, if you ever want a little bit of help calculating what your minimum mod is, years ago, if you're a smartphone user, and most of us are at this point, I assisted in the development of a smartphone app called Smart Mod. And you can plug in some numbers and it will not only show you what your minimum and controllable portions of your mod are, but give you estimates of what your mod would have been had your losses been, say, 10% or 50% or 90% higher or lower. So just a plug. I don't work for that insurance company anymore, but I know there's a lot of people benefiting from that app still. And just check it out if you're interested. And Deborah, I do see your question pop in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, gentlemen, there was some really interesting results on the Survey Monkey from the people that were polled in regards to their agreement on whether or not the experience modification is an effective measurement tool concerning the effectiveness of the safety program. I'd like to, for the audience, get both Brandon and Chris's opinion on that.
Well, I think what I was just talking about is a way that you can take what is not necessarily a be-all, end-all data point and make it more useful. There are a lot of things, and we'll go through my section of this, and I'll talk about some of the things that I've seen that distort that number, both positively and negatively. But if you've got command of this data point, what your zero is, what your perfect score is, and you compare yourself to that, it's going to give you a lot more insight into the performance of your safety program than just the pure EMR. That said, there are certainly things that can still further distort it. I mean, I had a client once who had a shooting on a job site, right? Somebody came up, snatched some guy's chain and shot him. I don't think there's anybody in the safety community that would have prevented that or had any input into that. So, that certainly impacted their mod. Is it reflective of their safety culture? Not particularly. So, there's no perfect insight, but I think if you have this figure and you're comparing your data to this number, you've got a lot of insight into your organization safety program.
Okay, great. Chris?
Yeah, I would have just echoed the same thing. It's not a perfect type of indicator, and NCCI even wrote a paper about some of the risks associated with using the mod for purposes beyond which it was designed. I had another example where a roofing contractor, very safe on the roof. The mod was very high, not because they weren't safe on the roof or they didn't have a good safety culture, but because as they were driving to a job site, one of their workers was struck by an uninsured driver, and work comp was the remedy for that case. And we have a huge loss that goes into the mod calculation for something that they had no control over. So it's one of those things where there are some reasons why you would not want to use it, or you have to look a little deeper to get the true story.
Okay, thank you. Brandon, I'll let you start on your part of the presentation. And I do want to make sure that you do address one of the questions where, again, we had a lot of mixed results come in terms of the importance on when the insurance company sends in the claim data to NCCI. So I assume you will be addressing that for the audience's sake, correct, Brandon?
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. So we've touched on some of this already, but I think fundamentally, we've all seen in our careers different utilizations of the EMR. Chris showed you what the impact of an EMR would be on his theoretical sewer contractor, right? Where the EMR basically doubled the premium for the same risk as far as payroll and type of work performed. Obviously, especially in an economically tumultuous time, insurance premiums are a significant expense, and controlling that expense is critical and is part of the value that we as risk professionals add to our respective organizations. Ability to work and no permission to be on site, related issues, right? You'll see in bid specifications, contracts, requirements to have mods less than 1.2, which is probably the most common, even less than 1 occasionally. So keeping your mod down, because it is a quick, fast, shorthand way to determine whether or not somebody is safe. It can be the difference between getting a job or not getting a job, being able to work on a project or not being able to work on a project, either because you're not cost competitive because your premiums are too high, or because there's some sort of requirement to have a lower EMR and keep you out of the mix because you have had performance issues that are of concern to prospective employers. Next slide, Chris. So Chris went through the math and how the mod is promulgated. And this is a little bit more of a granular breakdown of the different moving pieces that drive cost. And it hopefully helps you guys think about how we can impact a loss once it happened. We're trying to prevent loss all the time. We'll talk a little bit about that on some future slides. But once a loss happens, controlling the doctor bills, keeping prescription costs down, getting people back to work, if at all possible, even on a modified basis, those are the things that keep those ultimate costs down. And if those ultimate costs stay down, your experience mod stays down, and you benefit in all the ways we've talked about already. Next slide. Safety, safety, safety. Look, preventing loss is the most effective way to control costs, right? You guys spend all day, every day doing that, and the experience mod can be, hopefully that's the thing you take from this, can be a way to communicate to your leadership, to your project teams, the value of safety in your organization. It's something that people think they understand to a degree they probably don't, to a higher degree than they probably do understand it, but it's impactful, it gets people's attention. So take this information, use it to help drive investment in safety, because that investment in safety will ultimately result in a lower EMR and all the benefits that we've touched on. Return to work, I'm sure it's something that you guys are all focused on. Its benefits are obvious, right? If somebody's working, you're not paying them lost time. You may be keeping their medical costs down because they're more focused on their job and showing up and working than on their various aches and pains and their doctor's appointments. So there are direct and indirect benefits to structured, effective return to work programs.
Brandon, there was a question that came in that they would like for you to address. And the question is, how will this year, COVID-19, be calculated into our company's EMR?
So nobody really knows, right? It's a big TBD. On the one hand, there was a class code or two that came out on kind of an emergency basis for all the people going to work remotely, because obviously the risk of somebody sitting in their home working remotely, like a lot of us are doing right now, is different than people going to offices and whatnot. So that's part of this, and then as far as the compensability of COVID claims, that's something that's not really clear. There's a lot of, litigation in its early stages, kind of starting now, and it'll all get flushed out in time. And the range of answers to that question could be, it'll have no effect whatsoever, to it could have a very, very, very significant effect. There really isn't any clarity around it. And if you follow different lawyers and whatnot on LinkedIn, it's something that's being discussed day in and day out, with potentially major ramifications for the insurance business in its entirety. Chris, you have
Okay,
anything
thank you.
to add to that?
That's exactly what I would have said. If you go out to NCCI and do a quick search of their website or go to Google and type NCCI COVID-19, they've got a paper with a really good FAQs that'll answer some of those questions that employers typically have. Brandon, you've done a really nice job of summarizing what some of those FAQs and answers were.
Great, thank you, gentlemen.
So modified duty, we've talked about that. One of the things that I think people learn with time is the most effective way to manage any sort of claim, but particularly comp, is disciplined diary follow-up and just stay on top of it. Some types of claims, you let them sit out there, they mature, and people decide it's time to settle. Comp is absolutely the opposite. You want to be in touch with the injured party, know what's going on, make sure they're going to their doctor's appointments if they have to be at them, figure out what's going on with their prescriptions, really manage it, and then manage it on the carrier side. We talked a little bit about reserves earlier, and Chris gave you an overview of what a reserve is. For me, sometimes a reserve is a not to exceed number. So you'll see adjusters say, well, yeah, I'm going to put a $25,000 number on that. And then when they resolve the claim for $10,000, they look like they've saved their company a bunch of money. When you look at the claim, you go, there's no way this is ever going to be a $25,000 claim. It should have been reserved for 10 from the get-go, or maybe 15 if you want a buffer. And you being engaged, challenging that, getting on monthly, quarterly, biannual calls with your carrier adjuster, asking those questions, pushing those issues, will push them to get these claims resolved more quickly, push them to make those reserves more appropriate. Obviously, keeping those reserves appropriate helps keep all of these figures within, control and reasonableness. And on a related note, immediate investigation and reporting, same thing, right? I mean, the sooner you run to these issues, the sooner you address them, bring the carrier in. The carrier's the expert, right? These guys know this stuff inside and out. That's all they do. Hopefully you guys are not workers' compensation and medical experts, because you're probably not preventing loss to the degree you should be. Let's get the experts involved on the carrier side that can help us control these things and point us in the right direction, get these things resolved favorably, quickly. And that all starts with a thorough investigation and reporting of accurate information in a timely fashion. Next slide. Unit stat cards. One of the things that you'll see periodically is errors in data. So every year you're going to get a NCCI worksheet that breaks down the promulgation of your mod. It'll have all the different component pieces that Chris walked through, the losses, the payroll by class code, so on and so forth. It's not simple. It's a little bit overwhelming. But that said, it's time and money well spent to audit it, vet it, make sure that everything in it is accurate and up to date. And that cuts both ways. I've seen people, there are some unscrupulous insurance agents in the marketplace that'll go out and work with their clients to maybe misclassify payroll to keep comp costs down, which is appealing, right? If the rate for what you do is typically $10, but if you describe it a little bit differently, it's $6, it can be appealing. It can help the insurance agent sell an account. But going back to what Chris showed us before, how you code and report your payroll drives what your expected losses are. So, here an extreme example, I had a bridge builder once that I was talking to, who, when I looked at all of their documentation, it said they installed sidewalks. Okay. Those, are if you're building with Legos, there's generally the same things, but outside the context of my children's playroom, building a bridge and installing a sidewalk are dramatically different from a risk profile standpoint. I saw why they did it, because they were paying basically nothing in insurance. And they were complaining about their high experience mod. They had an experience mod of like 1.6. Okay. It was off the charts. And it really stemmed from years and years and years of insurance fraud. And that's an extreme example, but people do that on a pretty regular basis. I had one once where one of my safety people called the insurance company of a glass sub, and said, you know, I need you guys to send some safety support out here. They don't know what they're doing. They're on the 40th floor of this building and they're unsafe, and somebody needs to intervene. And the insurance company went, what do you mean they're on the 40th floor? Their application says they don't go above 3 stories. So there's a lot of, and those are, again, extreme examples, but they're examples where the input wasn't accurate. And when you get your worksheet, you can look to see how your information is being reported. You can look at these unit stat cards, which is the means by which the insurance company communicates the data to NCCI. Really digging in, auditing the information that's promulgating your mod is important. And it sort of ties to this next point, which is claims loss runs. OSIPs and CSIPs, nowadays there aren't as many comp in CSIPs. Most of the wrap-ups are general liability only. But once upon a time, and still to some degree, there are comp OSIPs and CSIPs. So you go out and you work for somebody, they issue you a comp policy for the work you're doing for them, and they have to report your claims, they have to report your payroll to NCCI. And if they don't report your payroll, and that was 30% of your revenue for the year, it's going to distort your mod. If they misreport your payroll and they include all of your sub tiers as your payroll, it's going to distort your mod. Similarly on the claim side. So understanding the data that's being supplied, monitoring it, pushing it to be accurate is absolutely essential in this process. Chris. So Chris talked a little bit about this app that I guess he worked with previously. There are a couple different programs out there that should allow you to do some forecasting. You know, to the example Chris had with the car accident, my shooting example, those are situations where maybe you want to have your agent run the mod without that data in it, if you're trying to get a better bellwether for how you're performing from a safety perspective. So there are tools out there to forecast your mod, to do the analysis around what your statistical zero is, what your best case mod is. Play with your mod, understand it a little bit. You don't have to do it yourself, right? You should rely on your insurance agent or your risk manager, but you should drive that a little bit and get comfortable with it, because it'll help you in a lot of different capacities. The next bullet, trade contractors, don't use uninsured trade contractors. I can't tell you, and any general contractor that's on this call has seen it. General contractors get stuck with all sorts of lower tier sub comp claims. I think it's especially pronounced in Miami. You know, once a month, either Coastal or some of the other general contractors I work with get stuck with some sort of claim from somebody who claims they have no idea who they work for, right? They're out there and they don't know who they're working for, and they just submit the claim against a general contractor. So it's really important that you have that administrative process in place. Your contracts are require it, and somebody's checking to make sure that the people on your job site buy workers' compensation. And then beyond that, you know, understand the risks of using companies that have leased employees, can create a gap, especially with lower tier subs, and all that stuff. If it rolls up and hits your experience, it's going to drive your mod up, especially if you're a general contractor with primarily white collar exposure and you've got field, concrete cutting type losses that are coming through because you don't have appropriate insurance from the subs on your job site. I've hit on aggressive return to work. Debbie, there was a question.
Brandon, yeah, there is a question that came in from one of the attendees, and their question is for both you and Chris, is are work comp CSIPs a recommended method for a GC to help reduce their mod?
A workers' comp CSIP should theoretically have no impact on your mod, because every company in a ABC General Contractors has a workers' comp CSIP. Every entity on that project or projects is going to receive their own comp policy, and that data is going to get reported to NCCI, just like that entity's annual policies report the data. So every entity stands alone from a mod promulgation standpoint. The only time that there's combinability of mods is typically when there's common ownership.
Okay, great.
So back to this whole competitive thing, right? I mean, Chris showed you the slide before. Obviously, that's a meaningful amount of money, right? I mean, if your experience mod is 1.4 versus 0.7, you're gonna have to price your work differently, or you're gonna have to make less money if you're, to be competitive. Neither of those things are desirable. It's far more effective to prevent loss, and when you do have loss, proactively manage it to the best possible result. Chris, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I'll just close out with this. In my experience, and Brandon, yours has probably been the same, we use this risk management process as risk managers very, very often. It's essentially the framework for how we live our life. We start at the top by identifying what could go wrong. If it goes wrong, how bad could it be? What are some of the options to control that risk? Let's pick one, implement it, and try it. Just really want to hit on, in my experience, 20 years of experience, this is the most common failure point. People recognize what could go wrong, and then they implement a technique that maybe doesn't work. So it's just kind of a final reminder here. If you truly want to prevent losses, remember this hierarchy of hazard control. Attempt to start at the top and engineer those hazards out, eliminate them before you simply turn to the good old safety glasses or some type of personal protective equipment. If you live your life at the top of that hierarchy, you will control your mod way better than those that start at the bottom because it's easier. And a couple of resources that we used here that I think maybe Carlos can make this deck available in the future. Deborah, I'm not certain if that's your protocol for that, but I certainly can if people need to get a hold of it. But these are some of the resources that we used, and appreciate the questions that came in to this point. Not sure if Carlos is back with us to kind of close the program down, or Deborah, if you'd step in for that this morning.
No, there's just one other question that did come in from the Survey Monkey that they wanted to be addressed, which is because there was quite a bit of mixed data on that, and that goes to the heart of frequency is a better predictor of future losses. And there was a lot of mixed agreement on that one as to whether or not. So if you want to just kind of close with tackling that one question, gentlemen. Yeah.
Brandon, do you want to tackle first, or should I?
I'll tackle first, because then you'll probably soften it after I look, if you're having high frequency and you're not having severity, you're just getting lucky. Right. I mean, that's the bottom line. And nobody wants to bet on the luck of your company. That's what insurance companies aren't going to roll the dice if you're having high frequency and just dodging some bullets and it's not that severe, because eventually it's going to be severe. Frequency is a far better indicator of who you are from a safety perspective than severity is. People have unfortunate things happen on job sites periodically. They're not necessarily indicative of a poor safety program or poor safety culture, but people that have frequency issues typically have cultural issues and systemic issues.
Boy, I
Great.
wish I had something to add to that, but that's a perfect way to close. Really, that's exactly right. Yep.
All right,
The
gentlemen,
actuaries
thank you.
agree. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. We'll turn it back over to Carlos. Thank you.
All right. Hey, folks, I am still here. And maybe it's better that I don't have video, so you can't see my face. But I really want to thank Chris of Holmes Murphy and Brandon of Coastal Construction and NHG Specialty. You know, if you guys have Zoom insurance or know somebody that has this product available, I think that the South Florida AGC is really open to looking into it. I want to thank everybody that stuck around through the technical difficulties. This has been amazing. I mean, I'm not in your universe, but I mean, some of the information that I got was shocking. I mean, the bridge contractor being insured as a sidewalk contractor it's pretty nuts. Next month, so to address something that Chris said, we will be making all of the information that you heard today available. Very cool thing that we're doing now on our website, sfagc.org. If you go to the safety menu up at the top of the screen, you're going to see this month's safety session. You'll see access to the video of this session, as well as the materials that were included. And that includes the information that Milwaukee was going to pass along, which is actually a pretty cool PowerPoint of products that they're going to be offering this year. So that being said, next month's safety session will be held on December 9th. We're going to be welcoming OSHA's Condell Eastman, who will be discussing the state of OSHA. This is an annual event that we do every year with Condell, so please join us. He'll be giving us a rundown of the past year and what we should expect for 2021. One last thing, I want to again thank Milwaukee Tools, Kelly Cronenberg, SafeRite, and the members of our safety committee, Deborah Hampton, Phil Nana, Mark Leon, Enrique Sequeira, and Brian Cardona. And to close out, just a quick spot of sad news. I wanted to let everyone know of the passing last week of Gustavo Gonzalez of Safety at Work. A memorial service for Gustavo will be announced soon, and we'll be passing along that information. On that, I want to say again, thank you to everybody. Thanks again to Chris and Brandon and Debbie for adapting. When my system went down, you guys were absolutely fantastic. What a bunch of pros. And speaking of pros, thank you to all the safety pros who joined us this month. I look forward to seeing you again next month. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Have a great morning and afternoon. Bye-bye.